I find it kinda interesting how the more this video series goes on, the shorter each part gets. I guess I can thank my lucky stars that this is the final part. After all, longer videos tend to do better for watch time and the algorithm. This is the third part to a video series I've been doing on my channel, where I list the problems of the Neos archetype, provide an alternative that's never gonna get officially made, and then provide some card concepts to solve the current problems of the archetype in question, which is exactly what I'm gonna do in this video. But before that, since over 200 people have subscribed to my channel, a sponsor reached out to me to promote a product, and that sponsor would have to be a mirror, since this video was sponsored by my Patreon, which is only $3 by the way. A $3 Patreon where you get access to all my work in progress updates, a video archive featuring every single video on my channel up to this one, your username is placed in the end credits at the end of each video, and you get 2-minute early access to finished videos the day before they come out. Now you might wonder why I do the 2 minutes and not the full thing. Well, I have two reasons. I consider it to be a teaser trailer of sorts, mostly in the sense that the people who are going to be subbed to my Patreon are my biggest fans, and so I think it's best to give these number one fans number one fan treatment, while still keeping things fair. Kind of like the front row seat tickets you get at concerts. Yeah, they make you feel more special and provide you a much better view, but they don't inherently make you better than the people who just want to watch entertainment without funneling their money away. And number two, oh wait, no, never mind, there was only one reason. Oh, I also forgot to mention that you get my love and appreciation, which I don't have a lot of, so you should feel special for having it. I also update the Patreon every week, but I might as well change that tagline since it's false advertising, because I don't just update the Patreon every week, but almost every single day. Kinda crazy, I know, but I do want to make this a career, and when you support me on Patreon, you help me do just that. So go and check it out since it'll be one of the first links down below. Alright, back to the video. Now I mentioned earlier that I was going to introduce some card concepts that'll help the Neos archetype. However, there's one thing I need to do first, and that's reviewing all of the information brought up in the last two videos. Let's start with part 1 since that's the original. Most of the video was just an acid trip of me trying to prove that I strongly dislike the Neospatians, even though it's clear that I actually like them. Of course, this doesn't stop most of my criticism from being true. The criticism in question being the absolute abomination that is every single aspect of this archetype. The monsters are either too gimmicky in their effects or too useless in their quote-unquote consistent effects, and the ones that are consistent are typically far in between. It's like trying to find a needle in the haystack. Of course, the main card, Neos himself, is arguably worse, as he's just too difficult to summon for his own good, completely negating the existence of the fusions unless you have these cards in your deck. The spells and traps also suffer from this exact issue, with some of them being borderline useless to the entire archetype. Their existence is so bad that it makes me question what the hell the creators were thinking. The only saving grace here is the fusions, specifically these three. Any other ones are either situational at best or just downright hopeless at worst. Of course, those are just hyperbolic summarizations of part 1. What about part 2 then? Well, part 2 mainly consisted of me talking about the Marine Martian archetype, a custom Yu-Gi-Oh archetype I made back in high school, which was based on yours truly. And while this archetype will never get officially licensed, I think it's a good reference point as to what should be added into the archetype. Of course, there are also the comments pointing out various solutions for cards such as the Chrysalis monsters, as well as my take on what the Neos archetype needs. So what am I gonna do with all this information? Well, I'm totally not gonna use it to psychologically manipulate you into subscribing and liking the video. Instead, I'm going to apply it to the creation of the new card concepts for the archetype. Now here is how this is gonna go. I'm gonna cover the monsters, then the spells and traps, and lastly the fusion monsters. Afterwards, I'll give my black-pilled speech regarding this entire archetype as a whole, and even though this will be the final part to this little trilogy of mine, don't even think for a second that this will be the last Yu-Gi-Oh video I ever make. After all, I still have some stuff to say about this game, but that'll have to wait for now, as it's time to see if this archetype can really be fixed. Starting with the new monster concepts, the first of them being Neospatian Blood Jelly. And before you say it, yes, I used a website to create images for a lot of the cards because I was too lazy to do it myself this time. And yes, I based this effect off of another Neos card. The effect of Neospatian Blood Jelly allows you to switch this card to defense position once it's attacked, and as a bonus, if you have Elemental Hero Neos in your hand, then you can special summon that as well. Overall, I think I did a decent job with this effect, as I wanted to make sure that this card was still consistent while still having some wiggle room left for some gimmicks. I also wanted this guy to be a lot easier to summon, and this card successfully checks all three of those boxes. I decided to keep the level 3 tradition for this and the other upcoming Neospatians because, well, why not? I mean, that's a pretty good reason to do anything. Which reminds me, after this section I'm gonna have to get into a card with a license plate that looks like this. The next card on the list is Neospatian Rattle King, whose effect lets you do two things. First off, once per turn you can inflict 300 damage to your opponent for each Neospatian in your graveyard. Pretty useful if you ask me, especially when you're in a situation like this. The second effect lets this card count as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of yours truly. And see, this is exactly the type of thing that puts a smile on my face, as it perfectly provides a solution to Neos' major problem while still giving you you a factor in the Neospacians as well. And I think the best part about it is that this card not only has consistency, but it also uses the gimmicky side of the archetype to express this consistency, similar to another card by the name of Neospace Connector. Now if you think I'm gonna stop glazing my own creations, then you're most likely right, because the next card we'll be talking about is Neospacian Rosemary, a card that's arguably the worst one out of all these new Neospacians. The reason I say this is because the card's only effect is that you can banish one effect monster, spell, or trap card your opponent controls. Oh, you think so? Well, would you like to know that this same card comes with the following drawbacks? This card must be in face-up attack position to activate and resolve this effect, so let's hope your opponent doesn't have this on their field and this look on their face. The banished card returns to your opponent's field by your second standby phase. Yes, I forgot to add the word "you're" there. I was up early in the morning on a Saturday making these cards, so cut me some slack. Oh, and did I forget to mention the first drawback literally being that you cannot activate the same type of card you banished after this effect was resolved? To put this into perspective, let's say you're dueling an opponent and they just so happen to be using Destiny monsters and now have Clock Tower Prison on the field. You have this card, Neos Fusion, and a couple of other cards in your hand. If you activate this card's effect to get rid of Clock Tower Prison before you use Neos Fusion, you would have effectively locked yourself out of using Neos Fusion for the rest of the turn, which isn't that big of a deal since you can just use Neos Fusion first and then Rosemary afterwards. But let's be real here, this card's a powder keg waiting to explode like this guy's soda bottle. Hell, I can already see it now. You're in the middle of a duel. You need one good draw, one singular card that can make a difference not only in life points, but also in longevity. And when you finally get your hopes up and take the top card from your deck, this is what you get. And I'm not gonna lie here, if that was me, this would be me directly after that. Speaking of which, do you still think this card's pretty good? Didn't think so. Next up is Neospacian Voidmaker, which is probably my favorite out of all of them. Not because of the fact that I look like this in real life, but because of the fact that he's really unique in his approach to consistency, as you can send him and another Neospacian monster from your hand or field to the graveyard to special summon one elemental hero Neos from either your hand or graveyard. And now that I say this effect out loud, I think you're starting to notice a pattern here. But we can save that talk for when this timestamp meets that red bar down below, because I want to go more into this effect and how I think it does the archetype justice in terms of consistency, as it lets you use resources from both your hand or your field as material to reach your final end goal, summoning this guy. But what if he's already in the graveyard and I don't have any copies of him in my hand? Well, that won't matter since you can bring him back from the grave in the most literal fashion. Of course, this effect does have a slight drawback, that being you can only use this effect if you already had Neos in your hand to begin with, which isn't that bad of a thing if you want to contact fuse and decide to recycle the graveyard Neos instead of using the fresh one. Honestly, this effect is pretty good as it made me unintentionally start another glazing session. Let's hope that for the sake of this archetype, the next card will do the same. Neospacian Grand Pine is another concept I concocted that lets you attack your opponent directly. Wait, that's not it? It lets you add one spell card from your graveyard that specifically lists Neospacian in its text after you inflict piercing battle damage? Well, I know what cards I'm using that for. On a serious note though, this card is probably the best one for this exact reason, as you can practically reuse cards like Convert Contact, essentially giving you another draw 2 for free, and that's if you didn't have more than one copy of it. In fact, I almost feel like a power hungry bastard for even making it, until I realized that this archetype was so bad that I had to solve the problem myself instead of letting the corporation take the wheel like they did last time. The last Neospacian concept is Neospacian Emmy Dust, and before you ask, the bird is based on a Quetzalcoatl. The effect reads as follows: when this card is normal or special summoned, add one Neospacian from your deck to your hand, then if you have no other cards in your hand, special summon that monster. This effect is decently solid, as it lets you play fish for one of your Neospacians while also giving you a desperate out when desperate times call for desperate measures. All in all, I think that with the exception of one, I did all the Neospacians justice with their game design. Although I do find it oddly gratifying that the Neospacian based on the one I hate the most ended up getting the worst effect. Is it my immature way of getting back at this card? Maybe. Or maybe you, the viewer, are trying too hard to psychoanalyze me. Actually, no way, I came to that conclusion myself. You just sat there and watched me do it. Anyway, moving on, we have the Neospace ripoffs, starting with Neospace Janitor, and yes, that's the best I could come up with. Although if you weren't impressed by his name, you'll definitely be impressed by what's down there, as his effect lets you add one elemental hero Neos, Neospace, or Neospacian from your graveyard to your hand once per turn. Now obviously this is by far one of the best effects out of all the monsters I presented here, and if it makes some official rounds in the game, then it will be one of the best in the archetype. But I think it's important to note that it isn't just this card that's good, as Neospace Gatekeeper lets you set one Neospace or power Neospace from your deck directly to your field, and it even comes with its own protection effect, opting to banish itself when power Neospace is about to be destroyed. Now you may be wondering what power Neospace actually is, and if you want to know so bad, then just skip to this timestamp, but be warned, treacherous fates lie ahead. Moving on, we have Marigold Soldier and Lily Helper. I'm covering both of these cards at the same time because it's currently 4:43 AM and I have two tests to take today. Marigold Soldier has pretty much the same effect as Dandelion, only this time the two petal tokens can only be used to tribute summon elemental elemental hero Neos. Lily Helper on the other hand can be equipped to a Neospatian or Neos card you currently control, with an added bonus of adding this card's attack and defense to the equipped monster, which isn't that much when you actually look at the numbers, but at least the second effect is pretty decent, as it protects the equipped monster from destruction once. Overall, Marigold Soldier is definitely a contender for S tier status, while Lily Helper remains at the bottom of C, if not then at the top of D. Now if you'll excuse me, I'll be on my way to fuck your bitch. Oh shit, you're right, my bad. Anyways, like I was saying, let's move on to the spell and trap concepts I made for this archetype. Neospace Tribute is a normal spell card that lets you tribute one Neospatian you control to special summon another Neospatian from your deck or graveyard. Right off the bat, we're starting off strong with the spell cards actually doing something useful for the archetype, something I wish I could say for Common Soul. And you know what, let me just go on a quick side tangent here. Common Soul is by far the biggest disappointment in the entire archetype, and the reason I'm focusing on this card is because I think it's the best example for the word abomination. Calling its effect downright trash is an insult to trash itself. Its special summon effect is absolutely mid considering the highest attack for the official Neospatians is 1000, and that you can only use it once. Also, the card itself just wastes the first effect on potentially helping your opponent, which is just... what the hell, man? The worst part is, when this card leaves the field, so does that special summon monster. So all your opponent would have to do is pull this out of their ass and boom. All that effect for not even a single drop of blood. Funnily enough, this card is actually a good concept for contact fusion support. Yet it doesn't make it any easier for you to special summon Neos, and practically spits you in the face for special summoning a Neospatian. Which, can I say again that you can only do once? I mean, come on, this card should have been a practical layup in terms of game design. Just have the first effect be a once per turn effect that's derivative of the original, and have the second effect be an easier way of getting Neos on the field. Like seriously, it's literally not this hard to make a good card for an archetype. Just give a relatively balanced effect and add a little spice of OP to it. It's not that hard. It's like they intentionally tried to sabotage this entire archetype with how bad most of these cards are. Almost like it was an inside job being manufactured by people that despised Yu-Gi-Oh! GX and everything about it. Hell, it's starting to make me question or not whether jet fuel can't melt steel beams. But yeah, that's all I had to say about this card. Back to the actual video. Path of the Neospatian is up next, and once per turn, you can shuffle one Neospatian from your graveyard back into your deck. All Neospatians you control also get a 1000 attack boost. Is it a lazy rewrite of Neospace Janitor? Yeah. Does it still work? Indubitably. Mostly because of the fact that both of these cards operate as their own failsafes if the other were to be destroyed or banished. After all, contingencies and backup plans are always good to have, especially when you realize you're a failure at what you want to do. Neospace Reset is up next, and it lets you shuffle one elemental hero Neos and 6 different Neospatians with different attributes from your graveyard back into your deck to banish all cards on the field face down. Oh, by the way, this effect cannot be negated. To be honest, it's pretty mid when you compare it to what came earlier, as well as what's coming after, and the best it can do is buy you a couple of more turns before your inevitable defeat, but at least it can be the one draw that'll make you feel like Yugi Moto. Gatekeeper's Promise is next up on the list, with an effect that probably sounds a lot better than its name, depending on how you look at it. Its effect allows you to set one Neospace or power Neospace from your deck, or add one Neospace portal from your deck to your hand. Of course, the only caveat to this effect is that you have to have one of these guys destroyed by battle or card effect to activate it. And while it's pretty good if you don't want to run the Neospace skill for Jaden, it simply doesn't compare to the absolute cinema that is instant Neo Summon, a spell card that lets you special summon elemental hero Neos from your deck or graveyard to your field, with the only requirement being that you have to have a Neospatian on your field in order to do it. Not only giving you this guy for free, but also setting you up for a potential contact fusion depending on which Neospatian you actually have. Overall, it's very good, and I would rank it in S tier if I could. Neospace Portal is also another gem of a card, letting you special summon one elemental hero Neos, Neospace, or Neospatian from your deck to the field. The only drawback being that for the rest of the turn, you cannot special summon any monsters except fusions, which won't be that hard to adhere to when you look into the extra deck. Abandoned Spacecraft is next on the list, and allows you to shuffle all cards on the field into the owner's decks. After that, you can draw until you have 5 cards in your hand. Now, I'm not gonna lie here, I made this card way too powerful, so I'll probably take away that draw until you have 5 effect, and replace it with a simple draw 2 effect. Oh, and I would also change the first effect and have it just be you shuffling the cards you control back into the deck. Ace Hero is supposed to be the Neos counterpart to Favorite Hero, in both game design and cosmetics, and due to this effect being way too long for me to explain, I'm just gonna leave it on screen for the next 10 seconds and let you come to your own conclusions about it. All done? Good, because now we're moving on to Neospatian Call, another Neospatian support card that lets you reveal one Neospatian monster in your hand to special summon, as well as add one elemental hero Neos from your deck to your hand. Is it decent? Very, considering the fact that it lets you get a free Neospatian on the field and a Neos in your hand. So if you already have one other monster on the field, you could tribute them both for Neos. Chrysalis Emergence is actually unique in the sense that it's support for the Chrysalis monsters. You know, the same monsters I declared were absolutely useless to the Archetype. Well, here I decided to do my best to make them useful, by giving it an effect where you can send as many Chrysalis monsters from your hand or deck to the graveyard to special summon their respective Neospatians. Of course, this effect isn't necessarily the best, but it is a step in the right direction for what these monsters need, as the only things they had before this card were these three, along with Neospace. Before I transition into the next card, let me just play this obligatory clip from the past two videos. Oh, by the way, you might want to turn your volume down for this one. Power of Neospace is the first and only field spell concept, with its first effect giving elemental hero Neos, Neospace, and Neospatian monsters you control 900 attack. Unfortunately, this won't apply to the fusions, but oh well, what are you gonna do? Besides, the fusions have been fairly overdone in this archetype, so we might as well shift our focus on the cards that put them on the field in the first place. Also, all the Neospace and Neospatian monsters you control cannot be destroyed by card effects. You also get to normal summon one Neospatian monster in addition to your normal summon. This card functions pretty well as a field spell, and includes all the changes I wanted for the actual Neospace spell card, so I definitely can't complain there. Although I will say that I do hope Konami at least consider most of these effects when they make new spell support for the Neos archetype. After all, everyone knows that the fans are much superior than the creator when it comes to making the creation. Wait, hold up, I already made that joke. Moving on to the traps, we have Emergency Protection. It lets you special summon one elemental hero Neos from your deck when your opponent is about to attack you head on. Of course, the Neos returns to the deck by the end phase, but that doesn't change how much of a bailout this trap could be. In fact, the only problem here is that your opponent could very much be using this, which is unfortunately more common than you think. Neospatian Backup is another Neospatian support card. There's not that much to say as it functions damn near identically to Neo Signal, so let's just move on to the next card, that being Corruption Pod. Another trap that lets you banish one monster your opponent controls, and also lets you return it to them by your forced standby phase. It also puts a drawback on your opponent's monster, decreasing its attack and defense by 1000 after its return. I'm actually quite proud of this card considering the fact that this entire thing is based on Yubel getting screwed over by Jane when he sent her to space. No, I'm not adding context to what I just said, just watch the anime, it's pretty good. Neos Returns is the next trap card on the list, and has roughly the same effect as Neospatian Call, allowing you to add one elemental hero Neos from your deck or your graveyard to your hand, after a Neospatian or Neospace monster you control got destroyed by battle or card effect. You also get to return that destroyed monster to your hand as well. This effect is pretty solid, and can provide you a pretty good setup for a lot of combos. Neospace Legacy is next on the list. You can shuffle one elemental hero Neos and 4 Neospatians from your graveyard back into the deck. Then, if you control at least one Neospatian, you can special summon one elemental hero Neos from your deck. Now before you mention it, yes, I forgot to list the word graveyard in this effect. I doubt it'll mean anything though, since this video probably won't even blow up as much as the first one did. Last minute save is another trap concept I made, letting you gain 900 life points for each Neospatian in your graveyard. Right off the bat, this effect can definitely help you set yourself up for success, but it's really the second effect that'll have you just as bricked up as this guy when he sees a movie trailer, as the second effect allows you to destroy one random card in your opponent's hand after this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard by a card effect, effectively giving you actual counterplay to a mechanic that definitely pisses anyone off when they play against it. Soldier Sacrifice is the last trap concept for this archetype. Its effect lets you banish one level 7 or higher monster you control to gain life points equal to that banished monster's attack. That said, the banished monster will return to your field on your next standby phase. It's a pretty nice effect if you want some extra life points to seal the deal of your victory, but it's even better if you're the type of player that wants to see if your opponent can actually win if you just give him an inch. Now I know I said earlier that we got enough fusions for this archetype, but let me take a stab at it since this is my full name. I made 4 fusion monster concepts for this archetype in total, with the first one being Elemental Hero Neospatian Enforcer, who requires both Elemental Hero Neos and one or more Neospatian monsters. It's a level 6 warrior monster whose only effect is destroying any number of cards your opponent controls up to the same number of Neospatians used for this card's fusion summon. Now while that does sound pretty good, the fact that it has no protection in case your opponent has an ace up his sleeve is kind of bad. Oh wait, hold up, did I say kind of? I meant really bad, because that means that you'll just waste a potential miracle contact on a card that won't even be able to use its effect, which is the only reason you even summoned it in the first place. The second fusion monster on the list is Elemental Hero Absolute Neos. He requires Elemental Hero Neos and one Neospace monster, and is a level 9 warrior monster with 3000 attack and defense. Its effect allows you to set one Neospace or Power of Neospace from your deck or graveyard to your field, but of course just like the rest of the monsters, it comes with the second effect, letting you destroy one monster with the lowest attack on your opponent's side of the field after you destroy an opponent's monster by battle. Neos Kluger definitely inspired the core structure of this effect, but I wanted to make this a little bit more fair to play against, at least when it comes to casual play. The third fusion monster is Elemental Hero Pollen Neos, who requires Elemental Hero Neos and one or more plant type monsters. Once per turn, you can destroy as many spells or traps that your opponent controls equal to the amount of plant type monsters used for this card's fusion summon. Now while this card's effect may be a can I copy your homework type of deal, I think it brings up an interesting idea of Neos fusions and their counterplay to your opponent's spells and traps, because right now I can only think of like 2 cards off the top of my head that can actually do something about them, and last time I checked, this is 2 out of like 30 cards. The fourth and final fusion monster is Elemental Hero Mystic Neos. He requires Elemental Hero Neos and one spellcaster type monster. Once per turn, you can shuffle one spell or trap card from your graveyard into the deck and then draw one card. But wait, there's more, as the second effect allows you to banish one spell or trap card your opponent controls after this card attacks an opponent's monster. See, this effect is pretty good, especially the second one, but let me bring your attention to something. Remember when I said that it wasn't that hard to make good cards for this archetype? Now pair that statement with the one about only 2 cards being able to do something to your opponent's traps. Why do I ask you to do this? Because when people say, oh, these corporations can't do that, the game is too complex, you can just show them the entire clip of me talking about this card, and then look at them with this expression. Overall, these concepts aren't too bad. Hell, I'd say most of them are a major improvement for the archetype, and if they were to be implemented, I wouldn't let any of you hear the end of it. The monsters themselves are a massive improvement from their predecessors, the Neospatians being the biggest examples of this, as out of the 6 Neospatians introduced, only one of them was actually bad in comparison, with the rest having effects that make me wish I was there when Konami was making the originals, as I now know that I would have done a much better job at doing this than them. But let me not forget the best part about the Neospatians, that being their consistency with not only Neos, but also the rest of the archetype, as they actually help you fish out other cards just like every other archetype, instead of letting you play Russian roulette with your opponent's cards. And I can't tell you how much it warms my ice glacier of a heart to say the same thing for the Neospace monsters, as one helps the monsters that make up this deck, while the other helps the field spell contribute to the greatness this archetype is capable of. Of course, the likes of Marigold Soldier and Lily Helper also do good for the archetype, with Marigold getting you a solid setup for the tribute of Neos, while Lily helps you stall for time to make a final comeback. Obviously, I can't ignore the spells and traps as they are just simply immaculate. From supporting the Neospatians in a way that's just as good as Convert Contact, to providing a hefty alternative to a mostly generic field spell, to even providing faster methods to summon the ace monster, who's only level 7 vanilla I might add, finally finishing off with mostly secure ways of resetting the match's progress, screwing your opponent over while setting yourself up for a victory. It's just utterly immaculate, and it would honestly be the best addition you could make to a shitty archetype, although the fusions are the only ones I don't really care for here, as I honestly don't think the archetype needs more power, but more consistency, as most of the cards in this archetype, whether they are monsters, spell, or trap, only serve certain groups of cards instead of serving the ace, and by proxy, the entire archetype as a whole, because like it or not, Neos is the main character here. You can't activate Neos Fusion or Miracle Contact without him, and cards like Next, Neospace, Instant Neospace, and so many others are just not the same without him. And I'm not saying that Konami has to take this entire video as gospel and make every card I listed here an official member of the archetype. What I'm saying is that Konami needs to take a page from Dark Magician or Blue Eyes, and make more cards that are focused on supporting Neos and making Contact Fusion a much more viable way of summoning. After all, it's not like I actually hate the Neospatians, it just pains me to see them suck so bad when they could be so much better. But hey, what are you gonna do, I guess? Real quick, if y'all enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe so I can flex on the hoes and the haters. Also, follow my socials so that you'll know when I post a new video. And if you really enjoy my content, then consider checking out my Patreon, where I give weekly behind the scene updates, as well as an archive for all my videos. You can also get your name featured on the end credits, as well as early access to the first 2 minutes of all my videos, which also include this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.